So, good morning, everybody. We're just a little late, but you know, the weather is sort of iffy, and maybe, I hope other people will sort of drag in as we go along. I just want to update you on future events that SALT will be offering up through the summer. You don't have to write it down in your calendar because, of course, we'll publicize it, but keep it in the back of your mind, and maybe these are some of the things that you'd like to do. So, in February, we're going to have another Theology Over Coffee. This is what Pastor Paul sort of leads the discussion, and by then he'll be back from hiking the mountain, and hopefully he will not have broken his leg or something, and he can do that.
Thanks for those good thoughts.
In March 21st, we'll have another Learn and Grow like today, and this one Gary Hammer is in charge of, and we hope it's going to be on housing. Do you have any update on that, Gary?
Yes, we have a person from Habitat for Humanities coming, and then also Kim is going to come and talk about, what's it called?
Onward Eden Prairie. Onward Eden Prairie.
Onward Eden Prairie.
Okay, great. So that'll be another one of these Learn and Grow kinds of things in March. In April, we'll have a social kind of thing, and we hope to go over to the new Bell Museum. I personally am anxious to see that because I haven't seen it since it moved from its old, dilapidated kind of quarters, so that's exciting for me. In May, another Learn and Grow, and this one isn't really decided yet. We're thinking about the Russian Museum, not necessarily going there, but having someone come and tell us the history of that Russian museum, the kinds of the exhibits that they normally have. I know that you could go and take a tour. I've done that, and it's a great place, but maybe we'll learn a little bit more about the Russian Museum. In June, we'd like to think maybe we could go to the Saints game sometime in June. I personally have never been over to that stadium, so it's something I'd maybe like to do. So anyway, those are sort of our upcoming kinds of things you can keep in your mind, and spread the word and bring friends, and we're open to anybody. So right now, I think Pastor Paul will lead us in just a short devotional.
I'm delighted that Kathy is here today. 34 years ago, when I started as a youth worker here, Kathy's husband Ron was working as a youth worker at the Presbyterian church in town, Methodist church in town, that's right. And we would do events together, and eventually formed a band when our different youth groups got together once a month. So we played in a band together, and look at us today. I was just dating Karen at the beginning, yes, exactly. Look at us today. Just a note about that, Barb, what is it called again?
Theology and Coffee?
Theology and Coffee, this next one that's coming up. The topic or theme of that is going to be legacy. So you can start thinking now about your own ideas of legacy, what that means to you, but how are we purposeful about the legacy that we leave behind? Some of what, Kathy, you're going to be talking about today, those people that came before us here to Eden Prairie and the legacy that they left for us. And in connection with that, the devotion I have is about planting seeds and thinking about those pioneers years ago that planted seeds literally, but also planted seeds that resulted in this community that has grown up to what it is today. So, from Matthew, chapter 13. The Lord be with you first. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, Listen. A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. So for a moment, turn to the people next to you and talk about what kind of soil you are, what kind of dirt you are, or maybe even share how you may have been different kinds of soil at different points in your life. Share.
I'm a golden Where are you coming from? Okay. Rockets. Oh my. Okay. Dad all that all flat. Sure. It was some of the everybody had to have a positive money can do, yeah. So he moved us to, he went to Korea, came back. He had staked out 2 so he's supposed to go get the farm. So he moved us to when I was 5.
We're going to come back together. Anybody feel like you're among a bunch of thorns right now?
How about you? I'm tired.
When we read this parable, what we tend to focus on are those different types of soil that receive the seed. Even in the Bible, the disciples were so perplexed by this, they invite Jesus or plead for Jesus to explain this further, and a little bit later he talks about this. He says, well, for some people, the seed sown on the rocky ground is the gospel, the good news. And for some people, the ones on rocky ground, they hear the word and they receive it with joy, but they have no root. And when trouble or persecution arrives, that person falls away. Another hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't understand it, and the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart, and nothing grows. And still another one hears what is sown, but the lure of wealth and the world choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it and bears fruit. We like that explanation because it focuses on how we're supposed to receive the word. And in a sense, it puts it in our hands. We like that. We like being in control of things often, don't we? And when we think about people in the past sowing good seed, one of the reasons Eden Prairie thrived is there was good soil to receive that seed, and crops grew and people prospered. But that's not really the hopeful part of the story. As I said, sometimes in our lives we can feel like good soil, and we know there's other times where there's weeds that choke things out, or where it just feels like rocky ground and nothing wants to grow. It's that way with our human condition. And if what grows is dependent on the kind of soil we are, boy, some days we're going to feel like we are doing great. We're producing bumper crops, right? And other days it feels like nothing's growing. I want to invite you to think of a different focus for this parable. A sower went out to sow. And where does he sow the seed? Everywhere. Which doesn't seem like a good farmer in a sense. Because if you were a good farmer, where would you sow the seed? In the good earth, exactly. The rest of it you would leave alone. Let the weeds grow there. Who cares? The sower is so generous with the seed that it is sown everywhere to see what takes root. And one of the things I like about this is that we know change happens in life. And someday, what was poor soil, what was rocky soil, is going to transform into good soil, and that seed is going to take root. But what matters is that sower is faithful. What matters is that God continues to relentlessly reach out to us in our lives and plant seed, and does everything to help it to grow. What matters more than the fact that we might be good soil is that God transforms us into good soil by relentlessly keeping to sow that seed. One of the things I liken that to with our presentation today is how we contribute to our community by sowing good seed, sharing good things with our neighbors. And maybe some days it doesn't seem like the good things that you do make a difference, but we know they do. But little by little, over time, those things add up, and we create a community where things grow and flourish. Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for your relentless love that keeps sowing seeds in our lives. May we show that same persistence in showing goodness, in sharing love and kindness. Some days it doesn't seem like those things matter much. And it seems like the world around us, no matter what we do, is choked in weeds, or the rocky ground just allows nothing good to grow. But we do not give up the faith that we can make a difference as you make a difference. So continue to inspire us daily to do what we can to make the ground around us flourish and grow. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
You're welcome very much. Musical
Well,
chair.
going right along with that soil business, I shared with Deb back there when Paul asked us, to share with our neighbor. And we both agreed that we were soil that needed water in order to flourish, because we were always searching for education and further edification for ourselves. So today, I hope that our presenters will be able to tell us a little bit about the history of where we live. Now, I'm not a native Minnesotan, nor am I native Eden Prairie. I've lived in Minnetonka and Chanhassen, but not in Eden Prairie. So I sure want to learn more about where we've been in order to know where we can proceed and what the future has to bring. So we have with us today Kathy Case and Katie Qualley and Paul Thorpe back there in the back. And I believe that there are other people from the Historical Society Board that may be here also. I'm going to ask them to just tell a couple of sentences about themselves, because this is the first time I've met any of them, and then they'll proceed with what they have to share with us. So, Kathy, thanks so much for coming. Okay, Katie.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I know it's mighty cold out there, so we really appreciate you coming out today. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the Eden Prairie Historical Society just briefly, and then I'll let Kathy take over with the fun stuff. We have a board of about 14 people. Paul Thorpe in the back is our maps person. He's a retired surveyor, and he brought some fabulous maps to share with you. Norm Rogers is also here visiting with us today. And then Kathy is our president. Excuse me. She has graciously been our president for, gosh, at least 15 years, and vice president for at least another 10 over that. So we're really grateful to have such great leadership. And my name is Katie Qualley, and I'm also a member of Immanuel, and I've probably been with the Historical Society maybe 10 years? Anyways. And later on, I used to chair the Cummins Phipps Grill House committee there, so I will give you a tour of the house. If hopefully you're all willing to come over. So, in any case, I think I'll hand it over to Kathy, and she's going to tell you a lot about the history and show you some great photos. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Katie is an amazing person. She's our graphic artist on the board. That's her business. And all of the flyers that are in front of you, she has created all of that. So anytime we have an event, she creates the design for that event. So we're really lucky to have her. She's wonderful. If you've been over to the Smith Douglas Morehouse, Smith's Coffee Shop, there's a timeline that we're going to be working on. We're going to donate that. Katie's going to do the graphics, and it's about $1,000, and the Historical Society will be donating that. And we have a timeline that you'll see today at the Cummins House about the 3 different families that lived in the house, and Katie did the design for that, and we also donated that to the house as well. So I see some familiar faces in here. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for coming out to learn about our history. We have a very, very rich history here in Eden Prairie. It goes back to the Woodland Indians many, many years ago. And I don't know if you saw in the paper, but they're digging up down on 212 in front of Lyons Tap, the road, and they discovered some artifacts that were 10,000 years old, and amazing pieces of ceramics and carved things, and evidently there was quite a dwelling down in that area by the river. And we know that there were, even up until the 1930s, that we had Native Americans from the Dakota tribe that were still living down there on Seaver Peterson's land down there. So if you actually go down in there, which it's very difficult to get down there today by the river, but it's like a whole different world. You don't even feel like you're in Eden Prairie. It's a magical place down there, and we have it, it's sacred, and it will always be there for us. So eventually we hope to maybe have a walking trail or a bike trail that can go through that someday, so that would be really great. People that have come to Eden Prairie have loved Eden Prairie from its very, very beginning. If you can imagine Eden Prairie with no homes here, and imagine our rolling hills, our river, we are a river town, by the way, our river, our beautiful lakes, our creeks, you know, we just had a beautiful place. We had cranberry bogs. So many of the old timers have shared stories with me over the years when they were children riding on the school bus, which was a huge privilege that started in 1924, and the ride to school, you know, up and down. Everybody had a farm. Everybody in the 20s lived on a farm in Eden Prairie, unless you were a miller and you ran the miller store, or you were a Neil and your father was the postmaster. So really everybody was in farming. So everywhere you went, there was a beautiful farm all over Eden Prairie. And the good thing, the city as of 1985 had purchased some of these sites, and they really bought them for the land, to be honest with you, back then. Other than the Smith Douglas Morehouse, that was a treasure. That was a very unique, beautiful red brick, Shakopee red brick home. But the mayors back in those days decided that it was important, that house was important to keep. It was originally set to be our museum, and I can't tell you the fights that we've had over the years to try to save these sites. The Cummins Hips Grill House went up 3 different times, possibly for sale. A couple times the thought was to tear it down and make a baseball field there. The Riley J property luckily is rented out, and the barn was salvaged and used for all the events that we have there. That was about to be torn down. The Dorenkemper house was moved to the Riley property. That was a house built out of tamarack logs, and that house was going to be torn down, and Dan Herbst, a developer, actually saved the house when he found out it was built out of logs, moved it down to Riley with permission from the city, and paid for the move and paid for all of the restoration as a gift to the city for the development that he's done here in the city. The Cummins house was very upsetting to all of us that had already worked so hard. We put our arms around it 3 times, and the city actually signed a lease agreement with the Historical Society that we get to be the caretakers of that house. And therefore, we started something new. We've opened the house to nonprofits of Eden Prairie. So if you're in a nonprofit organization, which your church is, right, you can use this house free. And what we're trying to do is get the community involved and see what a great place it is, what an amazing space it is, and enjoy it like we do. So we do a lot of activities coming up. and that we use the house for, that people are welcome to. The Valentine event is coming up. And before I get started on this PowerPoint, I just want to throw in a plug. We have an annual meeting once a year. It's $20 to be a member for your whole family. You know, for you and your spouse, your kids, $20 a year. You get a wonderful newsletter 3 times a year that talks about our history, invites you to different programs. You're the first on the list to get to come to things if they fill up. Justice Paul Anderson, who knows who he is? A lot of you. Justice Paul Anderson's a retired justice of our state Supreme Court, grew up here in Eden Prairie, graduated in 1961. He went to the old Consolidated School, which is our admin building today, played basketball in the gym, was a farmer, grew up on Hilltop, and his mother, Helen Holden Anderson, founded the Historical Society in 1969. So that makes it our 50th anniversary this year. So we're going to have Paul come back and speak on April 25th. We're going to have it in the historic gym. So you can sit in the bleachers. They're still there. And we're going to have him down on the basketball floor. He'll be sharing stories about old Eden Prairie, about his mother, his famous Anderson name. You know, Andersons all over Eden Prairie. They were really the first big family. 14 kids all came here from Ireland. They were Scotch-Irish. That's why there's so many things that are Anderson. So just a really quick story. My husband and I, Ron, we bought our house in 1988. It's an old farmhouse. It was going to be torn down 2 weeks beyond when we bought it. A developer had bought the remaining 10 acres of what once had been 600 acres. So our house on Pioneer Trail in 1874 was called Red Rock Farm, and it owned all of Boulder Point, all the way down to Red Rock Lake, all the way down to Starring. And obviously, we have 1.5 acres today, so we don't have that. They were going to tear down the house and put 2 houses on our property, and we happened to know the developer. Said we really wanted an old house, and he said, well, come look at this house. I'm going to tear it down in 2 weeks. His daughter was living there with 6 roommates, and it looked horrible because they thought it was going to be torn down. They hadn't mowed the yard for like a year. You know, it was bad. Looked like the Munster house. We bought it that night. We signed on a napkin, and and we saved the house. Knew nothing about it. At the time, I was 31 years old, and I thought, I want to know the history of this house. You know, we started working on it right away. So I went to the local historical society, and Helen Holden Anderson was the president at that time. Marie Wittenberg was the vice president, and everybody there, everybody on this board, they were Eden Prairieite. Their ancestors settled here. I mean, they were an amazing group of people. You know, the Ralph Nesbitts, the Al Tuckey, and all these great people that I just really fell in love with them. I just loved it. I couldn't wait to go back and have coffee and learn more about Eden Prairie, and that's what it was. It was a coffee group that just told stories about the past, and it was wonderful. So at one point they had an opening on the board, and they nominated me, and I was the first person ever to come on the board that was not from Eden Prairie. I'm actually from Bloomington. And it was really exciting. So then I went to the bathroom, and while I was in the bathroom, I came back and they said I was the vice president. And I've kind of learned that I probably will be on this board until I die, because that seems to be the way it goes. But I love it. I did try to retire back in 2013, and it lasted 6 months. So I really am passionate about our history. And I'm just going to whip through this really quickly and show you what we've got here, and then ask questions, please, along the way. So first of all, we have Elizabeth Fry Ellett. She named our city Eden Prairie. It was a township at the time, and she was really good friends with Mrs. Ramsey, Governor Ramsey's wife. She was an authoress. She was from the East Coast, and she came out. She was on a riverboat going down the river, and she looked up at the bluffs. So imagine down by the river, and you're looking up at those bluffs. They were covered with crocus, beautiful, beautiful wildflowers, and she said, this looks like the Garden of Eden, and hence we became Eden Prairie. Now down in this area, and Paul's going to talk about this, there was the town of Hennepin. It was going to be a river town. It had already started growing. They had a blacksmith shop, they had a hotel, they had platted out all the streets. We would have been like a Hastings or a Red Wing. If this had succeeded, we would have had streets, Walnut Elm, you know, the typical main streets. And it was all mapped out, so we would have been an actual river town. And it started to die as people learned about the railroad that was going to be coming through. And that was going to come up where Miller Store, Smith Douglas Morehouse, and all of that was. So it kind of started to just fade out and disappeared. And then we just kept Eden Prairie. But if it had succeeded, we might have been called Hennepin Town. And we would have been a river town. But don't forget about our river. It's an amazing thing to have in our town. And, you know, get down there and take a look at it sometime. Okay, let's move on. So Elizabeth Fry Ellett, very famous person for our community. Here's a little history of our past. I'll let you read that. The last battle that happened between, we used to call it the Chippewa and the Sioux, which is slang for Ojibwa and Dakota. But our people were the Dakota people. The Ojibwa came from the East Coast. As they were pushed out of the East Coast, they came across, and they had guns. Our Dakota Indians did not at that time. And the last battle happened very shortly after we became a state and a township in 1858. So this battle happened right down by Lion's Tap. So when you're at Lion's Tap and you look up that bluff, right there and all down by the river and into Shakopee. So we ended up, they had hundreds on their side with guns, and the Dakota had about 70. And they were fishing, they were taken by surprise, and it was, they were mad at the chief of the Ojibwa, and they were having revenge. And so the Dakota, they knew their land. They knew where to hide, they knew how to shut down the ferry, they knew how to take this, and they won. They actually beat them. I won't tell you what they did to the chief. It was pretty brutal. But they won the battle, and that was the very last battle ever between two Native American tribes. And today our people are the little Six Bingo. That's the original Dakota tribe. And there were people that were still living down by the river until the 30s on the land that Seaver owns today, Seaver Peterson. And there was Indian Minnie who was down there, and every time there was a baby, a white baby born in Eden Prairie, she'd make little moccasins and come up to Miller Store and deliver them to the baby. She was very loved by the people of Eden Prairie. All right, here we've got our early settlement. There's that town of Hennepin that Paul's going to talk about. This is an early style cabin that belonged to J.R. Cummins and his wife Maddie. So when you're at the Cummins house today, it was across the road where the airport is today, and it kind of stayed there till it fell apart because they had nieces and nephews that liked to play in it once the house was built. They lived in this cabin for 20 years, and you know, he was from Pennsylvania, she was from New Hampshire. They got married at the Art Godfrey House in St. Anthony. That's where they met at a party. And these were people that lived on the East Coast. They had real houses on the East Coast. And they came out here and they lived like that for 20 years while JR started planning, building his beautiful home. So it's interesting. So we had a lot of squatters that arrived, and there were a lot of fights. In our museum, we have files that tell the most amazing stories, and there's one about a big fight between two different families. You know, they drew these lines, and they would fight about it, and one person shot another person, and that person had to go to Stillwater to jail and be in jail for a couple years, and then he walked back to Eden Prairie a couple years after that. But there's a lot of information in our files, and we're open every Monday from 11 to 1. Paul is in the museum a lot as Norm, and Ann Higgins is our curator. And you're welcome to come in and look through files, you know, if you have interest in, maybe today you see where you live on the map and you're interested in that family who lived once and had a farm where you live. So we have all of that information to share with you. The town of Hennepin ships more grain than any other city or township in Hennepin County in 1857. So that's by river. Isn't that interesting? You know, that we once had all of that. Paul, if you want to add anything as I'm talking about any of that, you're welcome to.
I'll talk about it, yeah.
Okay. All right, May 11th, 1858. This is our anniversary. January 1963 is when we become a village, and we have our first mayor, Don Rogers, who's a local farmer and related to you, right, Norm?
Correct.
Yeah, all those Rogers, all those Andersons, they all know each other, they're all related. So what's interesting about this, if this had not happened and the township had to vote on this, we would have dissolved. Eden Prairie would not be. So parts of our land are already in Chan and Bloomington and other areas, so we would have just been taken over by our surrounding cities if we had not voted to become a village. So when we did that, we got to keep Eden Prairie. So it's interesting, we could have lost that. Okay, here's the early days, the upper one here. Let's see if I can do this. This is the Eden Prairie Depot. So when you're at the Smith House, it would have been where the church is, that brick church is today. That's where that would have been. I believe that one of these is a Polly and one of them is a Miller boy. I'm not sure about the third one. That Eden Prairie, you can't really see that, but it says Eden Prairie Depot, and we have that sign in our museum, the original one, which is pretty cool. But look around it, it looks a little desolate. I mean, they lived out in the boondocks out here. Next door to that, we have an ice company that was out on Lake Riley, and this picture was like 1911. They didn't last long, their building burned down. But you can see their equipment they used, and this was to cut out the big blocks of ice that people kept, you know, that's how they refrigerated their milk and other items in those days. And then down on the corner there is the Eden Prairie Creamery. That was next to the Smith Douglas Morehouse on the north side. And then we have Miller Store, an interior picture, which is pretty fun. So Miller Store was on the opposite side where Miller Park is, and Kate and Fred Miller ran that. So if you look on your map, you'll see that at one point this land right here was owned by the Lenzen. Yes, it's the car Lenzen dealership. They were Catholics, and Kate was a Lenzen, and she married Fred Miller, and he was Catholic. So in our community, we were kind of divided up between being Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, but the Catholics went over to Chan, to St. Hubert's. That cute little church is still there that they used to attend with the cemetery. So they kind of stuck together. People kind of stuck together. But the Scotch-Irish were confusing because some were Presbyterian and some were Methodist. So they would get really upset if one of their daughters married a Presbyterian when they were a Methodist, and vice versa. And I heard this going on all the way until the 80s. You know, Ralph Nesbitt used to say, yeah, my daughter was now Methodist, and she grew up at the Presbyterian. But the funny thing about it, they had the same pastor. That's what's really funny, is the pastor would go back and forth to the two churches. And way back when Eden Prairie was first getting settled,